good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pam Scott, and I will be your host for today's Sage 100 year-end webinar, where we are going to talk about 1099s and 1099 history. Printing your forms, and we're also going to touch base on the new NEC form. So during this presentation, your phone lines are going to be muted, but you do have the ability to ask questions throughout the presentation using the Q&A feature. So if you do have a question, go ahead and enter it in. And as I take breaks throughout the presentation, I will address those questions. If there's anything that's going to get into a very lengthy conversation that cannot be managed within the time constraints that we have today, I will follow up with you offline and get those addressed. Also, if there is an abundance of questions and we can't get to all of them during our allotted time, I will, don't worry, I will follow up with you after the presentation today to get all of those questions answered for you. So thank you for joining us today. And the presentation is going to be in two parts. The first part, we're going to go through a PowerPoint presentation, and I'm going to provide you with a lot of information related to 1099s and Sage 100. And then when we finish this part of the presentation, we will get into, we'll actually go into Sage and take a look at the setups for the 1099s and vendor maintenance. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And feel free to type in those questions at any point during the presentation. So the first question is, what is required to process the 1099s from Sage 100 or Sage 100 Cloud? And Sage 100 is now known as Sage 100 Cloud. It is the same, basically the same product. So for today's purposes, I probably will just say Sage 100, but Cloud is also implied. So it is for either one. So to process your 1099s, you should be on a supported version of Sage 100. And those current supported versions are the 2018, 2019, and 2020 versions. In order to be able to access the new 1099 NEC form, you do have to be on one of these supported versions. You can still track 1099 history on the old forms, the miscellaneous interest and dividends in the prior versions, and can still access Atrix, but you will not be able to process the 1099 NEC form if that is required. If you need assistance with installing the service update for the NEC form, if you need assistance with helping with Atrix or anything else that we're going to talk about today, please be sure and contact our office for assistance. And as most of you know that have been using Sage for quite a while, there typically is an interim release download that comes out at the end of the year, and depending on what that download is, would determine whether or not you need to install it, if it impacts your particular business and what you do in Sage. We are not aware at this point if there is going to be an IRD, and we probably won't know until at least around the 20th of the month whether or not there will be. If there is something related to accounts payable that does need to be downloaded and installed, we will be following up with an email to make each of you aware of the situation. But at this time, we're not aware of anything else that's going to be required for the 1099s. So anyway, everyone will be informed if there's something that you require. So I want to talk to you for just a minute about the new NEC form that is new for the 2020 calendar year. The NEC form, basically the NEC stands for non-employee compensation, and that was previously reported under the 1099 miscellaneous form under box 7. So if you had contractors, contract labor, anything like that, that was kind of a non-employee compensation, that has always been reported on the miscellaneous form, but for this year, it is on going to be reported in a new format on a separate form, which is the 1099 NEC. The miscellaneous form still exists. It's there for things such as rent and a variety of other things, rent, royalties, and so forth. So it still exists and is still applicable. It's just that the box 7 is no longer applicable and is replaced with the NEC form. In order to track the NEC history and to print through Atrix, you do have to have a service update installed. And if you have upgraded recently, that service update would have been included with your upgrade. If you have not upgraded recently and you're on the 2018, 2019, or 2020 versions, then you would need a service update installed. And once that's installed, there is then a utility that we run that basically updates the boxes in Sage. And if you have any vendors that get the 1099 miscellaneous form box 7, it recognizes that that's the new NEC form. It automatically changes it and moves the history to the proper form into the proper box. When we go into Sage, I will show you how to check and determine whether or not you do have that utility installed, and talk with you about how you need to request it if you do not have it installed. So, so those are two things that will need to be done. And also, and we'll see this in Sage in a little bit, is that in order to see that NEC form, you do have to have your calendar year set on that screen to 2020, or you will not see that form. So if you're looking at the history for 2019, it's going to look exactly like the details and descriptions of the boxes were in 2019, and you're not even going to see that the NEC form exists. So you're going to have to look at 2020. So as I mentioned, the NEC form is only available for 6.0, which is the 2018 version. 6.1 is the 2019, and 6.2 is the 2020. If you're on an unsupported version of Sage, obviously you can't install the service update so that you can see the NEC form. We are uncertain today whether or not you can manually key that information into Atrix and have it print on the proper form. We have to wait until Atrix releases their year-end updates to be able to determine if that can be done, and we can test it. We have looked at it prior to them issuing a year-end update, and it does not appear that you can manually enter that information. So as soon as Atrix releases the update, which may be a couple of weeks from now at least, we will do testing on our part to see if you can manually enter that. If you do not have the option of doing that and you're required to do those NEC forms, then you would need to process those manually, and then make sure that you're getting in touch with me to talk about doing an upgrade so that you don't have to go through that manual process next year. So here's my email address, pam@oasisky.com. And if you do want to, for me to get in touch with you and talk about doing an upgrade of your Sage 100. Okay. If anybody has any questions about that NEC form, again, we're going to look at it in Sage shortly. But if you do have any questions, go ahead and feel free to drop in those questions. So what is required to process your 1099s from within Sage 100? Sage 100 uses Atrix, which is a third-party cloud-based product that is included with your annual maintenance subscription. And it has been around probably for at least 4, 5, 6 years at least. So whatever workstation is going to be printing the 1099s you do have to make sure that the Atrix e-filing and reporting is installed on that user workstation. So let's say that you have gotten a new workstation since last year when you processed 1099s. You may not have that the e-filing installed on that workstation. Also, if you're new in your position, and you know, it may be that that has never been installed on the workstation that you're using. So it does require that you have the sufficient permissions on the workstation that will allow the download of the workstation install, and also of any updates as they're released. This is something that OASIS can help you with, can certainly help you with getting that set up to be ready. You also have to be current with your software maintenance plan or your subscription plan with Sage. If your subscription has expired, then you do not have the ability to access Atrix anymore. That access to that third-party product is tied into your product registration and subscription expiration. So you do have to be current, and you also have to have an active internet connection because you do connect to Atrix via the internet. You must also have your AP options set up that you are tracking your 1099 history, that you want to track it, and then also you have to have each applicable vendor set up properly as well. Now, we're going to talk about, as we get into Sage, if you realize that you're not tracking the information, or maybe you realize that it wasn't tracked the first part of the year, but you started using it the second part of the year, we're going to talk about how you can easily correct your history so that you can still process within Sage and Atrix for the 2020 calendar year. So this reminder is, this is pulled basically back from 2018, and that there was a change regarding 2018 for e-filing 1099s within Kentucky. So your state e-filing for Kentucky. We're only talking about Kentucky here, so if you are in a different state, you need to check with your own state gov.gov to determine what the threshold is for the requirements for e-filing. So there's a lot of information here, but basically in the state of Kentucky, beginning in January of 2018, if you have more than 26 1099s that you are going to be processing for a particular company, you are required to e-file those. There are also requirements for the federal e-filing. So if you're not familiar with that, you can go out to the irs.gov and determine that information. And again, you may also check with your local, if you're outside of Kentucky, excuse me, that you would need to check to see if you're required to do that. So did just want to bring that to your attention. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into Sage 100, and we're going to take a look at some of the 1099 information and tracking that history. So as I'm going into Sage, if anybody has any questions, if you will please just type those in and let me know. So the company that I'm working in today is one of our demo companies, the ABC company. And we're going to take a look at a vendor, and I'm going to show you what that 1099 miscellaneous or NEC form looks like. So once you have the utility installed, or excuse me, the service update installed and the utility run, when you go in to set up a vendor, you now have an additional form for the NEC form. So you'll notice now that Sage supports 4 different types of 1099 forms: miscellaneous, interest, dividend, and non-employee compensation. So if you have the non-employee compensation, you can still say whether it's a business or an individual. And if it's a business, this field is going to say taxpayer ID, If you change that to individual, it's going to change this to Social Security number. So you do want to make sure that that information is filled in, because this is going to pull and print on your 1099 form. And then it wants to know what the appropriate box number is. So, whoops, I'm sorry, I grabbed the wrong form. Not employee compensation. So you'll notice that you have different boxes listed. And if I click on the 1099 history button, I can see the description of those boxes. If I look now let me just accept this and go back to a vendor that has the miscellaneous form. If I look at the 1099 history, you will notice that the box 7 is empty now, because that is no longer applicable. So the other boxes are still there. So if you have, you know, rent, royalties, things of that nature, proceeds to an attorney, parachute payments, anything of that nature, you're still going to use the miscellaneous form, and you're going to put it in the appropriate box. Now let me show you one more thing. I'm going to go back to the vendor that has the NEC form and see how I show this as 2020. If I change this back to 2019, so if you haven't purged out your 2019 history yet, you'll notice there's nothing listed there. So if you run into an issue with this, the reason you're not seeing anything is in order to see the boxes in the history, it does have to be set to calendar year 2020. So I'm going to pause just a second because I did see a question here. Okay, the question is what type of forms need to be ordered, and we will be, I will be covering that during this presentation. After we finish the stage, we're going to go back and we're going to talk about the forms. So that will be covered for you. Thank you for asking. So on the non-employee compensation, you have a couple of additional boxes. The one that's always there is electronic consent, meaning that you have gotten permission from your vendor if you're going to submit their 1099 form to them electronically versus physically printing or and mailing it to them. The payer made direct sales of $5,000 plus. That, you know, if you need to use that, you might want to check with your CPA, but basically that is something that's related to direct sales. And it may be related to like a door-to-door salesperson, online sellers, telemarketers, direct mails, and so forth. So if you're unsure if you're required to do that, you probably should check with your CPA. And then you also have this FATCA checkbox there, and that stands for Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act. So if you are required to do something with the foreign tax, then you would also check that box. So, so this basically, I wanted to show you that non-employee compensation. Now we're going to step back just a second, and you may be saying, well, I go into vendor maintenance, and when I go to that additional tab, I don't even have that area where I could, okay, someone raised their hand. I cannot unmute you, so if you would please, if you have a question, if you would type that in the Q&A, I would appreciate it. I do not have the ability to call on you without you typing in the question. Thank you. So if you do not see at all that you have the 1099 box, and that area is just completely blank, you want to go into your setup and go into your AP options. And you have to have in your options, it's checked for 1099 reporting. If this box is unchecked, then you're not able to set up any vendors at all to have 1099 information. If you, so let's say that you go and check it today, and you realize that whoever managed AP before you or 1099s they have not been tracking this history at all. It is not too late to go ahead and get that set up. What you would need to do is to go in and check this box, make sure you have the appropriate calendar year set, and then you would go in and set up your vendors, and I will show you how you can then key in the history of what you have paid them so far. So let me see if the other question, okay, the other question has not been entered. So if you could please, oh, there we go. All right. Okay. So the question is, they're currently on 2016. What is the process to update? You do have to go through an upgrade of your Sage 100. And Jeff, I will follow up with you after this presentation and provide a lot more detail. And so I will address that for you. So I'll get with you after the session. And then the vendor name and address and payables may be different than the name and address needed for the 1099. Any information on how to handle this? So let me think for just a second. I don't have an answer for you immediately, but let me make a note of it. So I guess I'm assuming that maybe you're talking about if a company has multiple locations and they have different names. I mean, I could see where they might have different addresses if you're paying a company in different locations. If you could clarify an example of what that might be, I would appreciate it. But I will definitely follow up with you about that. So once we have made sure that we are tracking the 1099 history, when you go into vendor maintenance and you're pulling up a vendor, so let's say that you haven't been tracking it all, so you set it up. Let me find a vendor here that's not set up. Okay, so once you turn it on, all of your vendors are going to be set to none. So you would need to go into each individual vendor, and we'll say that this person is an individual. They're going to get the non-employee compensation is what they qualify for. You're going to fill in their social security number, the box information, and then you can go into the reports within Sage, and you can pull up a check history report. You can run that by vendor, so you could pick that one particular vendor and run a check history report for a date range of January 1 through today, what you have paid them so far. And then what you would do is you would click on the history button. Yes, I want to save changes. You'll notice that obviously this says 0. So you could change that. So let's say that we've paid them $4,500 so far. Then you can go in and put that history in there and click OK. And then once you have this set up, any new invoices, now if you have any open unpaid invoices, it's not going to be reflected that is subject to a 1099. But any new invoices that you key in will then, you key in the invoice, it will show that it's subject to a 1099. Once you pay that invoice, then it will automatically add to the year-to-date figure. So, and you do not have to worry about printing your 1099s before you start cutting payments in 2021. So that information is stored separately in Sage 100. So that is not a problem to go ahead and start processing those payments. Now, I will tell you something about this 1099 NEC form. is that it has been discovered that it is not an option in purchase order. So if you do a lot of things through purchase order and you do your receipt of invoice through PO, if it is a vendor that is subject to a 1099, the NEC form is not an option. Apparently that was something that was missed in the testing. Sage is aware of it, and they are working on a fix and a patch for that, but it does work properly within the Accounts Payable Module. Okay, all right. Okay, all right, I see. So someone is talking about that they have someone that uses a different name and they changed it right before printing and then they change it back when they're finished. And another would be if somebody's, it's a DBA. The changing it before you printing it and changing it back, I believe is how you would still have to do that. I will double check and follow up if there is a different option. And the only thing I could say with the DBA is that you might, add that to the name field, Compact Computer Corporation, DBA, Oasis Solutions, and maybe have it print that way. But I do believe that you have to manually change it before you print and then change it back. But I will double check if there is a resolution to that, then I certainly will be glad to pass that along to all of the attendees today. Okay, all right, someone is asking if I can explain when to use the NEC form versus the miscellaneous. So the, let me pull up a vendor again. Hold on just a second. And so in prior years, and let me change this back to 2019. Okay, in prior years, there were three types of forms. There's miscellaneous, interest, and dividend. Those are the forms that Sage supported. The miscellaneous form, if you had non-employee compensation, it was always set up as a miscellaneous form in box 7, and that's where you tracked the non-employee compensation. The IRS changed that for the 2020 year and said if you have non-employee compensation that you have always reported as miscellaneous box 7, it is now the NEC form, which is the 1099 NEC, which is non-employee compensation, and this is where it's reported. So it is an actual separate form for non-employee compensation. You can let me know if that answers your question. It's basically what you used to report in box 7 on the 1099 miscellaneous form is now for 2020 has to be reported on the 1099 NEC form. And okay, Amy, you can just let me know if that addressed your question or not. I will tell everybody that everyone that attended the session today, or even if somebody in your organization registered but did not attend, that either tomorrow or the following day, you will be getting an email with a link to this recording. So you can go back through it as many times as you need to. You can also share that link with other employees and they can view the presentation again. Okay, it says, do you run the NEC form and then go back and run the rent and royalties? Yes, those are two separate forms that are printed separately. The miscellaneous form is still there for rent and royalties, like it always has been, Jennifer, and the NEC is for non-employee compensation. And then I'm going to go in, we're going to go back to our PowerPoint in just a second and talk about those forms and what forms you need. But yes, you are basically going to be doing, if you still need to, if you have rent and royalty like Jennifer does and non-employee compensation, you're basically going to be processing two separate 1099 forms for this calendar year. Okay. Any other questions while I'm still in Sage? Obviously, I can go back here, come back to Sage, but I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint for just a second. And it looks like I need to get started. Okay. All right. So we're going to go through a few more FAQs and some information about the forms and so forth. And then if I need to go back to Sage and answer any questions, I'll be more than glad to. So some of the questions, one of the questions is, you know, if I use Atrix, do I have to e-file? Let's say that you only have 10 1099s and you're not required by federal or state to e-file. Do you have to do that using Atrix? And the answer to that is no. You can print your forms through Atrix and there is no charge to do that. It does require that you register with Atrix, and as I mentioned, you have to install it on your workstation. So you have to register and install it so you have access to it. But there is no fee for an end user to process and physically print their 1099s. If you are required to e-file, federal and or state, then there is a fee. And you can go to this website and you can get a list of what their fees are. They also offer bundled options. If you have multiple companies, or maybe you're an accounting firm or a consultant that does AP for multiple clients, and you process their 1099s for them, Atrix does offer bundles at a set price so that it's more cost effective than paying on a 1099 per 1099 basis. And the other thing is, kind of this last bullet point, you can actually ask Atrix to do it all, which means, you know, we're helping you get the information into Atrix if you need assistance, but then you're telling Atrix, I want you to generate these 1099s and electronically send them to my vendors, and then I want you to do the e-filing. So I'm basically, here's the information, I'm giving it to you, and I want you to handle everything after that. We're finding that more and more clients are doing that because they're finding that it's more cost effective. And to date, I have not had any issues or complaints that I'm aware of from any client that has had an issue with Atrix doing the processing for them. So if you think about it, it keeps you from having to purchase forms. You don't have to purchase envelopes. You don't have to if you have a ton of 1099s, you know, you've got the time involved in stuffing all of those envelopes, sealing them, the postage to mail them out. So you may want to consider let Atrix do it all. Certainly go to that website, check out the current fees, and you can determine whether it's more cost effective or not. I typically find that most clients don't have to process a lot of 1099s. So I'm not sure if they're using the full service for 1099s. I know on the payroll side, we have a lot of clients that over the past couple of years have started letting Atrix manage everything with their W-2s because it's just so much more cost effective, and it saves them a tremendous amount of time with having to manage everything. So let me go back up and see if there's any questions. Okay, so we don't have any new questions. And, okay, hold on just a second. Okay, we're going to get into some more FAQs. Okay, here was a question from earlier, is what type of forms do you need? When you're using Atrix, they do not support a pre-printed form on the front, okay? So they only support blank perforated 4-up forms. So there is another option. So let me explain this to you, and it will depend on, and this information may be a little bit later in the presentation on the FAQs, but let me go ahead and cover it since we're talking about it. When you buy the packets, it is going to include the red printed federal copy and the on the back. So it's gonna include the back is going to be pre-printed. It includes the red federal copy. And some packages do include the envelopes. If you're getting the 4-up form packets that have the pre-printed back, but a blank front, you will have to purchase forms for the 1099 NEC as well as the 1099 miscellaneous if you are required to do both, if that makes sense. So Jennifer, going back to you as an example, if you're going to get these pre-printed packets and the back, the front's going to be blank, but the back is pre-printed, you would need separate forms, one for the miscellaneous, one for the NEC. You can also buy completely blank 4-up forms where both sides are blank, and you basically print both sides, and it'll print the appropriate information, but you're still going to need to purchase the red pre-printed federal copy. So in those, the completely blank forms typically don't include this. So if anybody has any questions about that, just let me know. If you are letting Atrix do everything and you're just paying them to do it for you, then you don't have to worry about purchasing anything. So in asking where can you get those forms, you will have probably already received an advertisement or solicitation from Sage to purchase the forms through them, and you certainly can do that, but it is not required that you purchase the forms through Sage. You can go to any office supply house, Office Depot. A lot of your printers that you might work with would carry those blank forms. So you can order from Sage or you can order from your local supplier. It does not matter. The blank perforated form is the same regardless of who you purchase it from. You may shop prices. If you're ordering and it's going to be shipped from Sage, you might be looking at getting those ordered pretty quickly. I don't know if there's going to be any delays due to COVID or people doing more online shopping this year, or you can certainly run down to Office Depot and pick them up yourself. And then this is kind of just a reminder of what I just talked about. If you need to do the miscellaneous and NEC and you purchase the forms that are pre-printed on the back, you're going to need to buy packages of each form. Okay. This information I'm going to just pull up. It is a lot of information and talks about the forms and which form it is and so forth. I'm not going to go through and read all of this to you, but when you get the recording from this session, all of this information will be listed there. So basically, it just kind of talks about, this information was pulled from Sage's site about what's included in their packets. Okay, and this basically just says that Atrix only supports the 4-up perforated forms. So You know, if you've already bought your 1099s and you bought pre-printed 2-up forms, you're not going to be able to print those through Sage, through Atrix. They only do support the blank perforated form. Okay, all right. So if anybody has any questions, let me just look. Okay, I'm not seeing any new questions about that. If you are going to require assistance, and this, it could be anything related to, you need to install the NEC service update and run the utility so that all of your history is ready to go before the end of the year. If you need assistance with using Atrix, how to use the grid, make sure your information gets into the system and is correct. Any assistance with e-filing, whether state or federal. If you realize that you have not been tracking history properly and you're wanting assistance in getting it set up so that you can use it for 2020, or you just want help making sure you have everything set up properly so you can start tracking in 2021, just let us know. Everyone should have received at least, I believe we sent out 2 emails in November with information on how to request year-end assistance. It was combined for 1099s as well as W-2s. But for those of you that have worked with us for a while, it's kind of the same routine. We have a form that we need for you to fill out and submit to us, letting us know what type of assistance you need. And then once we get that information, I will be reaching out to each person individually and getting an appointment scheduled with one of our year-end specialists, and they will help you with whatever you're going to need. So if you do need assistance and you haven't filled out that form yet, I encourage you to do so. Those slots do fill out very quickly, and we have been scheduling appointments for the last probably 3 weeks, so don't delay that. If you did not get an email or you can't find it, if you will email me at pam@oasisky.com, I will be glad to forward you a copy of the email that you can then submit. We do schedule these appointments on a first come, first serve basis, so please do not delay. If you are concerned about your history is not correct, or you haven't been tracking it or don't have it set up, that would be handled kind of outside a year-end appointment. But if you email me the situation, then I will pass this along to our tech support team, and then someone will be glad to get with you and work with you on getting this set up. The other thing, and I'm going to follow up with the one client separately after the session, but if you find that you are not on a supported version, please get in touch with me so that I can get in touch with you and talk with you about the upgrade process, what we can start doing now to get prepared to get you upgraded in the first quarter of 2021. There would not be time to get anyone upgraded before the end of this year, but we certainly can start on a plan and make sure that we get you in the queue as quickly as possible after the beginning of the year. So also just to note that our offices are going to be closed a half a day on Christmas Eve, and then we'll be closed Christmas Day and New Year's Day. Other than that, we will be scheduling appointments up through the end of January. And if you need any additional assistance that's not a quote year-end appointment, then feel free to get in touch with our tech support department, and they will be glad to help you. So I'm going to go ahead and open it back up to see if anyone has any additional questions. A couple of things that I will follow up on is if there is an alternative to just changing the name of a vendor to their DBA or something of that nature prior to printing and then changing it back. If there's an alternative, I will let the group know. If you do not get a reply related to that, then you'll know that that is still the option that you need to follow. And then also I will be following up with the question about that you're currently running the 2016 version and what do you need to do. So I will be following up with you this afternoon on that as well. So I'm going to open it up again, and let's see, there's one more question. So this says, if you are filing electronically, do you still need to print off the forms? That is two separate things. The e-filing is what is required that you, instead of you sending the paper copies to the IRS or to your local or to your state government, instead of submitting that information manually, if you have more than 26 1099s per company, they require you to file electronically instead of manually sending them their documents. The printing of the 1099 forms, because your vendors still need to get a 1099, and that is not considered e-filing. You have the option to either physically print those, or you can choose to pay Atrix and have them send a copy electronically to your vendor. But e-filing is basically submitting your documents that are required by the federal government or by the state. So hopefully that answers that question. Your vendors must get a 1099, you must submit a 1099 to your vendors, whether somebody is submitting it to them in an electronic format or you're physically printing it. So hopefully that answered your question. And I do believe that the limit for 1099s is still $600 or more is what the threshold is that you're required to submit it. Some companies choose to send 1099 regardless of how much they've paid them, and others do use that threshold, anything over $600. And Sage does give you that option to choose what the minimum payment is for creating a 1099. So I'll leave it open for just a second and see if there are any more questions that come in. And if not, as I mentioned, we will be sending you a copy of this presentation. There will also be another presentation just like this next Wednesday. The AP presentation will be at 11 a.m. So if you have other employees that would like to attend, have them feel free to register for that session or share the recording with them. So I'm not seeing any more questions at this point. So I'd like to thank everyone for your time, and we'll go ahead and end the session. Thank you very much.